Welcome in to another episode of the Otts and Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil, John Evans here again. John, who was fantastic on our Tuesday show breaking down the offense, joins me to break down the defense here as the Ducks are undefeated and are once again, and before I even kind of throw it to John here for some thoughts, I want to do what I did last time and just read the counting stats and where they rank. So let's try this one on, John. How's 11th nationally in scoring defense at 12.2 points per game, 11th nationally in total defense at 238.2 yards per game, 14th nationally in yards per play at 4.16 per game, 5th nationally in pass yard defense at 123.4, and then 39th in rush yards per game defense at 114.8. That's pretty solid, isn't it?
And exactly, it's across the board. It's a consistency in terms of defending the rush, defending the pass, getting after the quarterback, being good in coverage. Everything you need to do, Oregon has done very well so far this year. Will Stein and Tosh Lupoi each posted like a graphic last night of like iron sharpens iron of the stats of the offense and the defense, and there's a ridiculous amount of them that both rank in the top 15 right now, and that's the result you can see on the field because that's why Dante Moore has been so good because he gets all these different looks from the defense in practice, and he was every day last year in practice. So it does create the best of the best on the field. So this defense has been very impressive so far, to say the least.
I want to stick with some Tosh here because I did a podcast yesterday with Spencer McLaughlin over on the Locked On Ducks, and we talked a little bit about the Tosh Lupoi big game kind of reputation. Saturday being the first time in his career, I think, in a marquee game that the defense had really done its job and held the opponent in check. And of course, there was a couple frustrating sequences in the fourth quarter and overtime, but they ended up stealing the game with the Dillon Thieneman interception. What's your perspective on Tosh and just like the work he's done? And then maybe in a second we can get into some of the X's and O's and things that you think are strong from him. But like, just what's your impression of watching a Tosh Lupoi coach defense?
Lupoi is he's a fantastic coach. He's on this coaching staff for a reason, and Lanning has as much trust in him as he does for a reason. And then it goes down to what I don't know if you watched the Ducks versus them from this week after Penn State game, but he was talking about the kind of the build up to that final play, and that is he was talking about how important Lupoi is in terms for everybody on defense, getting everybody prepared, all the things that he does to put his players in the position to succeed, and that's what he's done really well. It's less of his scheme. This is Lanning's defensive scheme. It's the mint defense he brought from Georgia, from under Kirby Smart. But Lupoi does a really good job at scouting and preparing his teams to be in these situations. At times in some of those bigger games previously, they've been outmatched by teams like Ohio State or trying to play man coverage against Washington's receivers a couple of years ago. But I think he definitely has the athletes where he can give so many different looks at this point now, where because you have guys like Jaden Kennedy and Dillon Thieneman who can move all over to the different spots in the secondary, it helps create a lot of confusion for these offenses.
Let's talk a little bit about specifically the Penn State game and some of the looks that they showed Penn State in big moments, because that's been something that's been, I know Dan really delved into, Dillon even after the game did. You wrote an extensive 1,300 word story today kind of talking about Thieneman's role and kind of the versatility. I was just looking at PFF coming on before he came on here. Like, he has, I think, more than 50 snaps at 3 different positions on PFF in terms of just playing all over the field. But I wanted to ask you specifically of kind of where he was on that final play and why we're hearing a lot of people give credit to Tosh and this defense for maybe kind of out scheming or kind of finding an advantage in a big spot.
Yeah, he was in that kind of high linebacker rover spot that Oregon has kind of stolen from what Ohio State was doing against them in the Rose Bowl. They put the best defensive player in the country, pound for pound, Caleb Downs, in that spot in the Rose Bowl, and it really shut down what Oregon was able to do. And Oregon has gone to Dillon Thieneman at times in that spot, and that's where he was on that final play. They've also done Kingston Lopa, some of the other safeties as well. And then also Bryce Betcher worked a lot of that too. Because Penn State played so much 12, 13, 21. I didn't actually track it for them, but I'm sure their number of 11 personnel sets had to be maybe a third of the time for them. They were not going to a bunch. They'd like to have their tight ends on the field, and obviously they have their running backs that they do. So Oregon was matching that with a bunch of different looks. They played way more base personnel with Blake Purchase not only playing on the line as an outside linebacker, but playing off the ball more like just a regular linebacker as the third guy in that mix. But But yeah, that final play, it was exactly what that position is designed to allow a player like Thieneman to do, because he's in like a safety spot. He's an athletic safety. You want him in pass coverage from what he can do. They're playing like the middle and the cover 2. Other things they want to do, they've done at times like rotated to a cover 3 out of it, where they just drop him straight back. But he can play the pass there, but because he's so high up, the offensive line doesn't count him in the run game normally. They're gonna be like, hey, this is we got these guys on the line. Here's the Mike linebacker, here's the Will linebacker. Okay, we got 6 in the box, but they don't count Thieneman in the box as part of that, and it lets him fly downhill to make those tackles in the run game. We've seen that spot be really good defending the run game, and what it did so well in that final play was Oregon had seen a look like that. It seemed looks like that throughout the game. They're doing the fly sweeps all game. And they knew they had to be ready for that wheel route off of the fly sweeps, because they run the fly sweeps. The tight ends kind of look like they're going out to block for a fly sweep, and they can get out for a wheel route. Thieneman crashes hard on that fly sweep, but because of where he is, he can crash hard on that and still be in position to defend that tight end. And because the coaching staff was so prepared, I think it was Brian Michalowski, the linebackers coach in that thing, was like, oh yeah, they're running score in the Ducks versus them. He's like, yep, they're running the score route right here. Like Oregon knew exactly what Penn State was going to do at that point. And as soon as Thieneman saw Aller pull the ball, eyes got found the tight end, was right in the perfect spot. And even if Aller had somehow gotten it over Thieneman, Aaron Flowers was right there and delivered a big hit on the tight end. So I don't even know if he would have caught that ball anyways.
I think the cool part about, there's a lot of cool parts about that Ducks versus them series. And I'm sure most of our listeners watched this week's. It's up there amongst the better ones they've done for sure. But the cool thing, you do get a sense of like the tactical chess match. I mean, hearing the communication back and forth, and I remember there was one play where Lanning's asking Maringer if they have the right defensive look for them to take that shot downfield on 4th down to DeCorian. And like you're talking about here, you get the sense of like there's so much more than I think fans, without having access to this, there's so much more that they're doing from a game, in game that is solving problems. And I think so much of the time you want to say it's all the players or it's all or nothing. It's just it all works together. And in that moment, having a player like Dillon who fits so well in that spot, and having a coach who's able to identify, or a staff that's able to identify what the opposition's in and finding an answer, that's why he's a good defensive coordinator. I think I'm happy that was highlighted the way it was in that episode.
Exactly. It's that marriage of having the scheme and the preparation, and then having a player who, Thieneman, we know about his preparation. He's the guy that shows up at 5:30 a.m. every day and is kind of the leader for this group, and the amount of film he watches. But to having that special combination of the plan from the coaching staff, but then also a player who can do these things, and not every player can. Dillon Thieneman is a special safety within college football. Him, Zakee Wheatley from Penn State, Caleb Downs. There aren't many at that conversation who are going to be. Downs will be a top 10 pick, but guys who are in that day 2 range, even at safety, a less valued position, and he's that special kind of player, and that's what Dan said. He's got that mental capacity that you don't have from everybody, where he can handle so many different things, and he's only been in this program since January, since transferring in.
We'll hit more Dillon in the safeties, and maybe a little bit condensed, since we just talked quite a bit about Dillon there. But let's start the position by position. I wanted to do interior defensive lines. We're not going to talk about Mateo and Tatum and Blake and all those guys on the edge, but let's focus on first, I think, just the 2 guys that have solidified themselves as starters. One we knew going into the year, one we suspected going into the year, but wasn't a day 1 starter, and that was Amari Washington and Bear Alexander. 2 players who have plus traits without question. I mean, Amari, I can't tell you how many times, and you catch it probably on your detailed rewatches almost more than I do, how many times he almost beats the center off the ball. I mean, just there
was one in that Penn State game where he definitively left before the ball was snapped, but just barely. And then so the center snapped it, and he didn't get called for anything. But
yeah, because I remember sometimes I do this, and they're kind of, the mileage may vary on the value, but I like to watch those people reacting to the games. And I was watching one, and the guy goes, "That's a false start," and he rewound it or "That's an offside," because he rewound it over and over again. And I think it was really close. But
I had one from the Oregon State game where I was going frame by frame, trying to see because every single person on the defensive line, offensive line basically was still still had a hand in the dirt, and he was already hitting the guard. And I had to go frame by frame to see when the football moved because he was so quick on it.
I just think these two guys have solidified themselves and both played really well. I thought Bear's best game without question, unequivocally, was last game. And the interesting thing here, and again, I don't know how much I put into these PFF grades. I like them for snap counts, but it would probably surprise listeners who don't look at this as frequently as weirdos like us do, to know that Bear Alexander's actually got a better overall defensive grade right now than Amari Washington. And Bear Alexander is also outproducing from the counting stand perspective as well. So I'm not here saying I think Bear Alexander is a better football player than Amari Washington, but I'm saying I think you could make a case that they're both playing at a very similar level to this point in the season. And that's a really welcome, I'd say, surprise based upon how things started.
Yeah, it was a surprise just in the fact that we thought Bear would be that guy coming in because he had the experience from Georgia, the experience from USC, even if it didn't necessarily translate into full seasons of work. This is a very talented guy. So it was a bit of a surprise to see Tion Gray and Terrence Green out there as much as they were in those first couple of games. Not necessarily that those guys are bad players, but just because they're younger. They're younger, they don't have the experience that a guy like Alexander does at these bigger programs. And I think also it has to do, they realize that Amari Washington is so fast, they can play him at a 3-tech, even though he's 330 pounds, and that he can cross the base of these guards, and be an impactful player. So I think then I think the way that I had it pegged out over the summertime was Amari Washington would be like the nose tackle, the Jamari Caldwell type, and then Bear Alexander would be like the Derek Harmon, the 3-tech, more pass rushing specialist. But Washington's so fast that he can do those things. They've found this role for Bear Alexander where he can be somewhat of a nose tackle, even though he's more in the 310 kind of range, more as a defensive tackle than Amari Washington. But he's been really strong against the run throughout the year. Honestly, I've been really impressed with the way he eats double teams up the middle and is able to discard those and then help his teammates make tackles or even make tackles for a loss himself, as he did in that Penn State game. But that Penn State game was really they made a switch, I think, in the Northwestern game. They swapped it at halftime. But That was the game where it was, this is Bear Alexander's kind of coming out party, because not only was he making impactful plays against the run game, but he was doing it against the pass too. And that's the ones where people really start noticing those players on the defensive line once they're getting into the quarterback's face. And he was able to get past the interior of that Penn State offensive line really, really easily on Saturday night. I was really impressed by that, especially when he was matched up with their center.
He kind of worked their center, having watched it again. It was like a knockout, heavy favor of Bear. I thought he played fantastic in that game, and that's a game where you make yourself some money. I know I just kind of denigrated the play of Penn State center, but that's an offensive line and an operation where if you perform well, people pay attention. I think every single team had a scout or some sort of representative at that game. He's been on teams' radar forever. This isn't anything new, but just to see him perform in these colors that way, I think did him well. The other two guys to jump into here, and there's actually another after for just extended a little more, but we mentioned it. Terrence Green, Tion Gray, basically identical players. In some, I get them confused, but maybe it's because their initials are the same. One's 6'6", 336, the other one's 6'5", 330. Snap counts this year: Terrence Green's played 92, Tion Gray's played 91. PFF grades: Terrence Green is 64.1, Tion Gray is 64 flat. My point is, there's a lot of similarities with these two guys, but John, you'll probably tell me that they play a little bit different too.
They are pretty similar. They're both in there just because of that size. To be the kind of the main, just a typical nose tackle. 6'6", 336. That's hard to displace a guy like Tion Gray in the middle. And at times in those first couple of games, I felt like teams were taking advantage of that size in terms of the leverage that they were able to create. That was something that Alex Harkey, even in that first game, talked about when you're playing against those FCS defensive linemen. Some of those guys are smaller, but they can create leverage. And I thought there was at times where Tion Gray was really falling victim to that. But I think since scaling down those guys' role, I think their play on the field has honestly increased. It's been better because they're not asked to do as much. They can just be in there first, second down, 1st and 10, just eat up blocks in the middle and stop the run. I thought those guys have played a lot better these last couple of weeks.
And then one more player I just wanted to mention, And I don't have a whole lot else to say, and I was a little surprised by this, and maybe you will be too. Do you know who's third on the team in total pressures according to Pro Football Focus?
I just sorted it, so I know it's Aiden Breland. But
that surprised you as much as it surprised me?
yeah, not really, because I'm surprised they haven't tracked as many pressures for a guy like Amari. I think there's some that I would have maybe credited him with that he didn't get, where he kind of like flushed the pocket, but maybe didn't necessarily get a hand on the quarterback. But not really, because Breland is definitively a key part of their third down packages, their passing down packages. They'll bring him out, and then they'll even let him like go to work on tackles that he can use a little bit of that power against, because they're longer guys. And then his speed is a lot for these guards to handle. Oftentimes, he's 6'5", 290, a little bit of not like a longer and he's not skinny because he's an interior defensive lineman, but like a longer build than a guy like a Terrence Green or Tion Gray, where he uses that athleticism, and it's hard for guards to deal with at times on the inside. He talked about it being a guy who trained in like Taekwondo and Jiu-Jitsu as a kid. Those just take levels of flexibility that are hard to find from guys who normally play defensive line positions.
Yeah, and to your point, PFF tracks by what kind of situation they're in. 35 out of 44 snaps Breland has played have come in pass rush situations. He is very much kind of an interior pass rush specialist in this defense. Only has 4 pressures, by the way, and we'll talk about it. Maybe this is the natural transition. The guys off the edge, Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, lead there. 18 for Mateo and 10 for Tatum. I don't even have too much to say about these guys because they've been fixtures and such known commodities for multiple seasons here, but they've been absolutely as advertised. And I think Tatum really was disruptive. There was that one series where he got the sack and then also the tackle for loss or tackle at the line on Aller. These two guys, we know what they are. You need players like this to be productive, and you kind of run through where they were where they are statistically at the start of the show. You're probably not a defense that's able to rank that way without versatile guys off the edge, and Oregon certainly has 2 of them, and 2 of them that are frankly, I think, getting better in a lot of different facets over the course of their career. So, what do you have to say about these 2 guys? Again, I think they're pretty different players, but just very steady performers so far this season.
Yeah, they were a big part of why we thought this defensive line group would be one of the strongest and the most solidified for Oregon coming into the season, because you had your 2 edge guys coming back and you have all that experience. But like you said, they've continued to get better. Mateo Uiagalelei has been a very productive pass rusher, but he's flashed some, adding more moves to his bag to be able to get off the edge. And he's also played really good against the run this year. He's moved into the like traditional defensive end role that Jordan Birch was playing for this team last year more, where he kicks into like a 4-eye sometimes instead of always lining up off the edge. And he plays with strength that you don't see from guys his size, where I think he's 6'6", 6'7", like 270, but he can play with leverage against these guards and hold them up on the inside to be able to. I thought he along with Bear Alexander and Amari were the guys that really stood out to me from that Penn State game, especially with their run defense. And then Tatum Tuioti continues to get better as a pass rusher. The bull rush has gotten a lot better. He's not as much of like he's not as bendy as Mateo. Mateo's not a super bendy edge rusher in general. He doesn't get around the edge as well as Mateo does, but he's very fundamentally sound. And his dad is the defensive line coach, so that would make sense. But you can see it on things like the sack that he had on Aller, where it was a naked boot, and Tatum's just the guy over there on that side where they leave him unblocked, but he's playing heads up, doesn't crash too far down the line, sees the quarterback get out on the bootleg, and then Aller's not an incredible athlete, and so he's able to make the tackle there. But there's other times too where he sees the defensive lineman go the other way, crashes down, he gets even with the line of scrimmage, is able to play it either way, and then can make a tackle for a loss on the running back or the quarterback, depending on what Aller did with the pitch. So he's such a huge part of this defense, and I think it's so underrated what he does to this team, especially in the run game with the edges he sets and all that stuff.
Yeah, he is PFF's top-rated rush defender with a grade of 79.5 on this team. I don't think that surprises people. I should note, like Mateo, I just had his grades pulled up a year ago, and again, I said mileage may vary about something else earlier. Absolutely, with PFF grades, I've been more critical of them probably than ever. The more I've kind of dug into them, doing the weekly recap that our former colleague Jared Mack used to do. But I will say, like, Mateo was somebody who was in the mid-60s as a run defender. He's now mid-70s. He's taken, I think, a step there. I think, John, as he said earlier, that kind of stands out as well on film in terms of what we've seen. Let's move over to kind of the reserves from this group. And I think we all anticipated Blake Purchase was probably going to be third on this hierarchy, and I'm not overly surprised. He came in with Mateo and Tatum and played quite a bit as a freshman. Credit to him for using last year as a redshirt year and like being somebody who was patient enough to do that. We'll see if someone like Mekhi Hughes also has that patience, I guess, as the year wears on. That's notable. That's a story we didn't talk about in the last podcast because that broke in between. But I guess I'm a little bit surprised that Ashton Porter's role has been what it is and that Elijah Rushing's role has been what it is. There's been kind of a snap count discrepancy there. And Porter is somebody who I know is quite a bit more stout than Rushing. Rushing's frame is like picture perfect for this position, and I just kind of anticipated he'd be more involved. But I also have to remember that Porter is a year older, has been in the program longer, and has put it. He's up to like 290 now, 295.
Yeah, I think
he's like a big boy,
and at like 6'3" too. It's not like he's 6'5", 6'6" like Aiden Breland is either. I think with Rushing, like you said, you do forget that he is just a year younger than a guy like Porter, so there is some of that development there, I think. But I think those guys just straight up play different positions, even within. Like, I have
agreed.
Like on my depth chart, I have all three of those guys listed at different. I have Blake Purchase as like he's like the jack linebacker for this team. He's the fourth linebacker that comes in, and then like I call Tatum Tuioti a Sam linebacker because he's more. He is basically an edge rusher, but he does like if they're gonna drop anybody into coverage off that defensive line, it's Tatum Tuioti. He was the guy that dropped on the final play of that Penn State game. And yeah, he's just bigger, so he plays a lot on those like 6 lineman fronts. When Penn State was going like jumbo 13 personnel on like 3rd and 1, they'd put Porter in there and with Mateo as like the 2 edges, and then play those guys in like a 4-eye. And I thought Porter was good in that Penn State game too. He played a limited number of snaps, but the few times he did come in for rundowns, I thought he played well because he is just so strong like that. So I think it's less of a Porter is definitively ahead of Rushing, and it's more of those guys like play different positions. Because they use Porter specifically to come in and be like a run defender because of the size he has. They've even done it sometimes, put him in like what they're doing with Marion Winston last year, where they put him at like a defensive tackle position and let him get out of the pass right third downs. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off. I was just interjecting. So if you have more.
No, that's I don't know. Blake Purchase has been good for this team for sure. His ability to be a coverage piece has been actually very impressive. Like you don't typically want a guy like Purchase covering tight ends and stuff like that, but he's done it pretty well when they've asked him to this year. The other 2 guys that get me excited are we haven't seen Toby Hastrup, but we've heard so much about him. And then Nasir Wyatt in the limited sample size playing. He's like the backup for Purchase at that jack linebacker position, and so they're doing him when they're up big in these games early. But just has that kind of like shiftiness, bendiness off the edge that like it's not Von Miller in terms of like Von Miller's power, but what Von Miller did so well when he was a prospect coming out of Texas A&M was he can dip his shoulder and get under these offensive linemen. It's like feet are quick, and that's what Nasir Wyatt does. It's pretty. Like it shows up on the tape. All of a sudden, you can do like a little hop step, Euro step around a left tackle. That Mateo Uyunglele, as good as he is, Mateo just can't move like that off the edge.
This kind of puts it into perspective. He's had 8 pass rush snaps, and 2 of them have been pressures, which is you put like Mateo has had 100 pass rush snaps, 18. So you look at that, that's like I know completely different sample sizes, but you can at least acknowledge like. Wyatt has been really impressive in the very limited snaps he's got. I'm happy you brought him up. That's somebody who I'm fascinated by, like long term, and like I guess maybe that's like one small like if we do a little brief tangent here. The Ducks have so many good players for their base packages, but then they've got these mini specialists like a Nasir Wyatt, who I think is almost exclusively a pass rusher. You've got a Kingston Lopa, who you kind of talked earlier about Dillon and his versatility, but like Lopa can just present so many different options for a Tosh Lupoi with his size, his length, and his ability to hit players over the middle. I just like that you kind of are collecting these kind of unique pieces and that the staff is savvy enough to find ways to utilize them. Obviously, Nasir not quite as much as the others because he's brand new, but that to me is a sign of like, we're going to find the advantages, even if it means going down and playing our 27th or 28th guy who most teams wouldn't even think about playing, but we can find at least a role in this game or in this matchup.
Yeah, with Wyatt, I remember the two pressures. One of them was like just a straight up win off the edge. The other one, it was like using him in situationally like that, where they put him, I think it was late in the game, so Purchase was just playing the regular edge spot, and then Wyatt came in to be the jack linebacker, and he was like lined up off the ball more in the slot, and they brought a simulated blitz with him, and he just went straight like through, I think it was a running back trying to pick him up, straight through a running back and like got to the quarterback even. Like just straight through the running back. Like, yeah, I think he like kind of like dove over him and stuff. I think it was from the first game. It was pretty exciting, just the athleticism he has out there.
His progression is going to be fascinating just because I don't know what the body type looks like ultimately. Like how much weight can he put on and maintain some of that explosiveness. But this was for over like a 3 or 4 year period, one of the more productive defensive players on one of the best programs in the country down there in Los Angeles. So certainly a player that has been on radars for a while. I think people haven't quite known what to do with him. I remember talking to Greg Biggins about him, and that's somebody who's down near Mater Day and watches him play a lot. And it was just kind of like, he's probably better than his ranking, but it's just hard. He's a hard projection to make. So I'm going to be fascinated what that looks like over the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, he likely doesn't play early downs, even when he is like a high level contributor to this team going forward.
Yeah, that's my hunch and expectation as well. Okay, let's move to linebacker, where it's kind of 3 guys. And I don't know if that's a huge surprise, but in the past, it seems like they've rotated a teensy bit more. And part of this is injury. Braden Platt hasn't been available. Dylan Williams is, I think, just getting back and becoming available. So it's kind of cut down their numbers, but it has been the Bryce Betcher, Devin Jackson, Jerry Mixon show. Bryce obviously out-snapping the other two fairly significantly. But let's talk a little bit first about Bryce, and then I want to get your thoughts on just the push-pull of the Devin Jackson, Jerry Mixon, because I think that's become kind of a niche Oregon fan argument about like which player they like better, who they think is a better fit. But let's start with Bryce, coming off probably his best 2-game stretch of his career, double-digit tackles both games, sets a career high against Penn State with 12. There were moments there where he makes the tackle but gives up the first down because maybe he's not quite strong enough. But I think a lot of that is like no one's really going to hold up against those running backs with a head of steam on 4th and 1. I think he's been outstanding this year. I know, again, PFF grades, not to make it like they're not as strong as they were last year. I think Bryce has gotten better as a player and is legitimately playing himself into a situation where he's going to have a decision to make between if he wants to be a professional football player or a professional baseball player.
Yeah. I mean, I think the football player will be the route he goes. I think he'll probably get drafted this year. I think part of that comes down to last year he wasn't asked to be the main, the signal caller, the heart of the defense. That was Jeff Bossa last year for this team. And Bryce was able to fly around and do all his stuff, and he racked up the PFF grades. I think you've seen that a little bit with Jerry Mixon coming out ahead of Bryce Betcher on those marks. Not necessarily like Jerry Mixon hasn't been fantastic this year, but Bryce Betcher just does so much for this team. When you watch the games, he's in there every single play, hitting, regardless if he should be hitting that guy or not. He is always trying to hit somebody. And so he flies around. He makes a lot of tackles. He's been very active for this team. And what's really taken his game to the next level over the past few years is how much better he's become as a pass coverage and in terms of his processing on that side of the. Well, because he always had the athleticism to make him a good player in pass coverage, but it's the processing that's made his pass coverage better, and it's shown up in the run game too, where you can identify those holes and not. That's the only thing that does get him at times is because he is so aggressive. He'll over pursue and can take himself out of a hole or out of a play and get blocked, but he flies around and everybody wants a Mike linebacker like Bryce Betcher.
What do you think of the fit with Jerry and Devin beside Bryce? Do you have what have you seen on film? And again, I feel like it's hard with Devin because he was dealing with an injury in camp, was kind of limited coming in, and Jerry comes out and has these 2 very memorable interceptions, one for a pick 6. And I think that sort of shifts the discussion a little bit, and you can kind of get away from what you're seeing on like an every down perspective. But I will also say Jerry Mixon has been starting these games more recently and has outsnapped Devin Jackson, I think, the last 3 games, if you do the totality of combining all the snap counts. So what's your feel on these 2 guys, and do you have a preference?
Personally, I prefer Mixon just because the things he does. Jackson's a bit more of a come downhill and hit people type of linebacker, which when you're in certain situations fits better next to Betcher because you want, like, if you against a team like Penn State, you might want your linebackers to come downhill and hit people. The only thing is he's just been hesitant. It seems like he's just, and you can see it in just the fact that you look at like the tackle leaderboard, he's well behind where obviously Bryce Betcher is, but even he's behind where Jerry Mixon is because he just feels like he's. So many times I can pause, like the Northwestern game, I'd pause the tape and everyone on the field would be moving and Devin Jackson would be still standing in the same spot, like a second into the play. I don't know if that's not processing things at the speed he needs to, not having the confidence in his reads that he needs to, but he doesn't just get to, like, you have this athleticism and this speed that if you react quickly, he makes really good plays when he does react on time, but sometimes it's just not happening. Whereas Jerry Mixon is he plays almost entirely off of instincts. It's all like, again, like it can get him out of position at times, and he's not as strong of a guy like Bryce Betcher, where like if he gets himself out of position, Bryce Betcher can kind of sometimes just put a shoulder into alignment and recover and stop a run. Jerry Mixon doesn't do that as much, but he's a very, very smooth athlete that shows up in the pass coverage. And then another guy who's very cerebral back there. We saw him be able to bait quarterbacks against Oklahoma State, against Northwestern, to be able to get interceptions. And he does the same thing in the run game, where it's less of him being in the right spot because he's like what Bryce Betcher does, where he knows what hole to hit and stuff like that. It's more of he's just super instinctual and will react really quickly. All of a sudden, he's in the backfield for a tackle for loss. That showed up a couple of times against Northwestern, or he'll slide right around a lineman and be able to make a short tackle. But it's more relying on that instincts and natural athleticism.
I think with Devin, just to provide maybe a roadmap to improved play, he's playing way more this year than he did last year, just on a game-by-game level, or basis, I should say. He has a little bit of cover because Jerry's played so well, and so he doesn't necessarily need to play 45 snaps a game. If he has a rough time out there, hey, you can take him off. It does feel to me, and maybe I'm just being optimistic because I love the traits and the size and all of those things. It does feel to me like if some of this is a lack of confidence, a lack of processing speed, those can be things you kind of like train into yourself with more game reps. And maybe the Jerry Mixon through the first 5 games doesn't look anything like the Jerry Mixon the last 2 or 3 games going into postseason play. And maybe that elevates this defense a little bit, where you can mix and match a little bit and be more confident in those pairings, because like you said, there are certainly different skill sets between those two guys. But right now it does feel like Jerry's a little bit more consistent compared to Devin. And maybe we get to the end of the season and but speaking earlier about kind of mixing and matching and playing guys in different roles, maybe you get to a spot where you feel more comfortable with Devin.
I just feel like when Jackson's out there next to Betcher, they kind of they're similar type linebackers in terms of their like straight line speed downhill kind of guys, whereas Mixon's more of the fluid athlete instinct playmaker. So I think that's just to me, it's a better pairing when it's Betcher and Mixon, because you have Betcher and Jackson are super similar as linebackers. And when Betcher's the guy that's making these plays, a lot of the time Jackson just feels like he's a little bit left behind. Whereas if he was in that Mike spot next to Jerry Mixon, I feel like he would play better, but it's not necessarily the role that works super well for him.
Have we seen very much Jerry Devin?
Yeah, they've done it at times, but it's definitely like they were doing it a decent amount in like Northwestern, but like Oregon State game, Bryce played the entire game because Bryce Betcher just wanted to do as much as he could to put the Beavers in the dirt. And same with the Penn State game, because it is a bigger game. You need Bryce Betcher out there as much as you can. So they've gone to it, but I think as the season continues to progress into these conference games, Bryce Betcher's on the field because he's Bryce Betcher.
Yeah, right. I'm just wondering if there's ways to maximize skill sets by changing the
players.
If the answer is taking Bryce Betcher off the field to just have both those guys out there, I think everyone agrees that's not the right strategy.
Yeah, probably.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back. We'll talk secondary and then some final thoughts before we wrap up this defensive breakdown. Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. We are moving over to corner, then we'll hit safety. I guess I'll ask you this to start. Usually we include that nickel position with the safeties. Should we be talking about them in the corner position, or should we just make that a third group we talk about? No,
I think that's a safety, especially with the way that Jaden Kennedy's played it this year. the actual like snap counts of him up top, but it's a lot because it's added like another dynamic to what they've been able to do, where they can drop Thieneman into the box and move him into these different spots. Because Kennedy has experience. He played as a safety last year at Ole Miss, so I'd call him more of a safety at this point. In previous years, like I would have Brandon Johnson. I always confused when I saw him listed with like the safety, because to me he was just a slot corner, but Kennedy's certainly a safety to me.
Okay, well let's leave Jaden aside. We'll catch him in the safety portion of the show. Let's talk about these outside corners, and it probably gets talked about a lot, but I don't know if the appreciation and admiration is quite as high as it needs to be for just how impressive these two true freshmen, or the true freshmen and the redshirt freshmen, all these guys have been, but especially the starters, Iffy and Brandon. I posted the stat, and I'm sure John has seen it, of just like Finney's been, in coverage almost 100 snaps this season, and he's been targeted in coverage 11 times, and he's given up 2 catches for 15 yards. Like, that's outstanding. And we'll see against a team like Indiana if they're able to take advantage of different things with this Oregon defense, and that's a really heavy RPO scheme. But I'm curious to see like how they make, like Surratt to me is one of the better receivers in this conference.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see what those matchups look like, but I've been so impressed with these two freshman corners and the way they've been able to stack up week in and week out. I know we haven't seen them play very many NFL caliber quarterbacks, very many NFL caliber receivers, but they're doing the job that's asked of them, and they're doing it at a very, very high level.
Exactly. Like you said, they're doing what's asked of them, and they can do a little bit more than Oregon has had from their corners in other years. I think they're definitely better in man coverage than Oregon has had. They're also good instinctual zone guys, and the man coverage stuff shows up. It's just, these are different athletes that Oregon has at corner last year. It's not, I think Jabbar Muhammad and Nico Reed were both listed at like 5'9" last year, and that really showed up when you're playing teams like Ohio State who have guys like Jeremiah Smith. Like Brandon Finney's, that guy's 6'2", and he's long, and same with Sione Laule he's long, and Ife Obadegu as well. Like, they got all these long athletes who are really, really strong in man coverage, and you could see that in that Penn State game, like, they did not have fear of the Penn State receivers and Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross on the outside. They were, every time it was 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, man coverage on the outside, press, and let your corners go to work. And it worked because they couldn't get any separation from guys like Brandon Finney. So they're really good in coverage, but the thing that really stands out to me is the way that these guys fly to the ball when it is a short completion. Because that's why Brandon Finney, he's allowed 2 catches this year, but it's 15 yards, because each of those catches, he just instantly is there to try to make a tackle. And I think Ife Obadegu is the guy that really has stood out to me the most with that. He is, it's shown up times where it's not even a tackle, it's just a pass breakup, because he's there so fast once the ball is in the air.
Yeah, just 4 yards after the catch for Finney on those 2 receptions. Another stat I saw the other day, just to kind of put into perspective how great they were at Penn State, I believe the stat is Oregon cornerbacks did not allow a single reception past the line of scrimmage in this game. I think pretty much everything they gave up was on those sweep plays that are counted as a little bubble pass or a little short pass in front. So they took basically everything away there. I thought that was really impressive, and I also wanted to talk about the rotation, how maybe it's condensing a little bit or changing a little bit. I did end up going back and looking or checking the updated participation chart. I don't know if you saw this tweet, John, but Neem Offord did play at Penn State. Yeah. He was initially listed as not playing, but they updated that. So he has now played 5 games, which means he cannot avoid a red shirt, or sorry, he cannot redshirt this year, I should say. That's notable for several reasons, because in the light especially of Mackay and what they're planning to do there with the red shirt, I think people were kind of wondering, is that a similar plan for Naeem? Does not appear to be the case. I know he was on the trip, and it seems like he did play a limited amount, even though PFF, I don't think, has him having any snaps, so maybe that was special teams specifically. But he'd been part of this 3-4 5-man rotation the first 3 or 4 games. Darren Johnson comes back, Sione Laulea comes back and is healthy, and now he's kind of the odd man out. And it feels like they like the 2 freshmen together, and then they like the 2 veterans together with Laulea and Darren Johnson. And also looked like Darren Johnson kind of got a little bit more run in the end of that game against Penn State than Ife Obadegu, which surprised me a little bit based upon snap counts and then also production late. So a lot of ways you can go from here, but what do you think of the makeup, I guess, of this group and the way that they've kind of mixed and matched a little bit throughout the first 5 games?
Yeah, there was plenty of rotation early. It because Johnson was out, you could tell there were 2 definitive like starting lines where it was the Finney Obadegu pairing and then the Laulea and Offord pairing. And then when Johnson came back, I think Laulea went out for a game, and then it was Johnson and Offord, and then when the 2 of those guys were healthy, Laulea and Johnson on the back end on the like second unit, then it kind of kicked Offord to that 5th guy. And I don't think that's necessarily anything against Offord. He's a young guy. We've seen at times he got beat on a deep ball against Northwestern, like on like a jump ball kind of situation. I think the coverage bust against Oklahoma State, if I had to say who that was on, I think it was probably him. So there's those things that you need to work out as a young corner, but I don't think that's any discredit to him. I don't think a lot of people expected Brandon Finney to be as good and starting at the outside as a true freshman. I think a lot of people thought it would be more like what it's been for Neem Offord so far. But like you said with Aaron Johnson at the end of the last game, I thought it was really interesting to see how much. I think he outsnapped Ife Obadegu in terms of the total snaps in that one, and especially down at the end. Like he was out there on the field. It was him and I think. Okay, well now I can't remember who the other cornerback next to him was at the end of the game. I'm sure it was probably Brandon Finney. Actually,
I think it was Finney. I think, yeah.
I'm sure. I think Finney ended up playing like almost every snap
50,
in that game.
53 out of 60, I think, is what he played in that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see Theron Johnson getting that run in there, and in terms of especially like coming back from this bye week, I think it will be interesting to see how that rotation works out because he was a guy that just missed those first couple of games and not missed, like wasn't out, but just kind of dinged up, was like warming up for them and didn't get to play. So as he continues to get healthier, it seems like they do really like him out there. Anyway, we've seen it too. He's got a lot of Big Ten experience. He's really good in zone. He doesn't have those like physical traits that those other guys have, but he's just got that the trust and experience from the coaching staff. So I would expect him to continue to be that 3rd guy and see some more rotation. I just thought it was surprising that when they were going to that and they wanted Johnson out there, they were taking Iffy off the field and not Finney. Not necessarily that those guys have been one better than the other, but Iffy was the guy we heard all offseason, the talk about him throughout training camp and all the work that he did last year, and he's impressed so far when he's been out there for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is because I think the next follow-up question is Iffy's job, up for grabs, or is it possible that they make a change there? And the staff, Tosh in particular, has brought up the fact that a year ago, I think Dante Manning was the starting corner opposite Jabbar Muhammad, and then they went to Nico Reed after a couple of games, and so it's not impossible. But I also think don't overlook the fact that I think Iffy's played really well. It's not and I don't think Dante Manning was bad by any means last year, but Nico Reed just kind of took the job, and maybe Theron they'll see enough from Theron on film down the stretch of that game, and maybe he'll have a great game against Indiana, and that'll be a change. I'm not expecting or anticipating we see any movement there.
And I think we'll continue to see them rotate those guys as well. Like I think we'll see like 10 to 15 snaps of whoever that second unit cornerback like for each of those guys, anyways.
Not a whole lot left there. Just the last thing, because he's a player that's been asked about a lot over the last couple of years. Jaleel Florence just completely out of the rotation, seems to be healthy. He's playing quite a bit of special teams. He's only played, I think it was 19 snaps on defense, and that all came in a 60-plus point blowout of Oklahoma State. Kind of tells you when he's been utilized. So I'm maybe expecting he uses a red shirt. Last year was a medical hardship waiver, so he could theoretically be a junior again next year. That's not reporting. That's just speculating. But that's a player I know fans have been kind of clamoring for and wondering about. And I did include him today. I did a 10 most surprising roles on the Oregon roster, and I included him because he doesn't seem to have one right now. Yeah,
coming into the year before we kind of really – because we didn't know anything about where this depth chart and stuff would shake out, because there's just so much newness throughout the secondary, especially over the summertime. I had Jaleel slotted as that starting corner next to Theron Johnson because I was thinking you're bringing in a former Big Ten starter from Northwestern. That guy's probably going to start. And then this guy who was 2 years ago, he was a true sophomore for this team, I think he was a top 100 recruit, 4-star guy, a good, another one of these guys that's good frame, 6'2", long arms. Started for this team in that 2023 season, that final Pac-12 year, next to Kyrie Jackson, and was good for that team pretty much all year long until he did get hurt late. But I think that the cornerback is a very hard position to play. Cornerback is probably, I would argue, like the hardest position to play in terms of like your physical, like what it takes physically, because it basically is just almost entirely what are your physical traits. Can you match these receivers in terms of your athleticism, your agility? Do you have the length to be able to disrupt passes and stuff like that? And I think that maybe I don't know this for sure. I'm not in practice with how Julio Florence is feeling every day with his knee, but I think this could be a situation where next year he looks a lot better out there, and he could even get back on the field because it's the year after, and when he had such a devastating knee injury, I think he had to have surgery on it twice. If I'm correct,
yes,
like, it's just there was things did not go according to plan with this injury. So I think those setbacks are just continuing to. I think they probably limited him in terms of the reps he was getting in spring ball, in fall camp. And it's also in terms of learning to trust yourself and your body after an injury like that, learning to trust your knee to be able to plant right and cut right. And if you're not trusting it, then it's going to impact your performance because you're just thinking, you kind of can overthink things, overprocess things at times. So
the glass half full point I'll make is Noah Whittington didn't look very good a year ago, coming off a similar-ish knee injury, towards ACL. Looks significantly better this season. I hope that's the future we get from Julio Florence, because that's a really talented athlete who,
yeah, exactly.
I still think has NFL traits, and it's just a matter of, is that knee ever going to get right? Is he going to get the opportunity? And don't want to speculate, but maybe that opportunity is not at Oregon, because you talk about next year him being better. I think that could be true. I would also expect there's a lot of younger players in this team who are also going to get better. And
Ify Obadegu and Brandon Finney are still going to be here.
Yeah. And those guys are already ahead of him for a reason, and I think could both get significantly better. Here's one final thought. I was texting with a buddy of mine about this, about just the corner duo, those two starters. And I said, it feels like Brandon Finney, when he does go into the draft, could be, one of the 3 to 5 corners off the board. And my buddy said, I think he could be the first. How do you try that on for size? What do you think of that kind of an upside for Finney? Is it too premature because it's only been 5 games to suggest something like that? Or what do you see there?
Yeah, I don't know who the other corners in whatever that class would be, but he has these guys get graded as 5-star prospects because they're guys who, I think he ended up being a 4-star by the end of the cycle. But like the 5-star prospect rating is this guy has the traits to project to be a future first rounder, and he was tagged like that as a prospect for a reason, that it's shown up. He has the athleticism, the length to be able to disrupt receivers and create chaos as a cornerback. If he continues to play at this level, he can absolutely play himself into that conversation, because that's what NFL teams are looking for is guys who can play press coverage and disrupt receivers at the line of scrimmage, and then also be ball winners, which we haven't seen necessarily yet from Brandon Finney, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it. Some of his highlights in high school, he had some pretty incredible interceptions.
Well, he was an athlete at one point because they thought he had enough juice to play receiver. And I think 24/7, I think we goofed a little bit on the re-rank there, dropping him a couple spots. This looks like a 5-star guy with the way he's playing early on in his career. All right. Final position group, we'll shift over to safety. Let's focus on the two. We'll put Kennedy off to the side and Dalen Austin. We'll come back to that. But I wanted to focus on, and we talked at length already about Dillon Thieneman. I don't know how much more you have to say there. But I do want to point out, coming in, we knew it was going to be one of these second-year players opposite of him. We suspected, especially when Trey McNutt went down with a leg injury, that's pretty significant. I've been a little bit surprised. Maybe I shouldn't be, because this is kind of the nature of the beast at Oregon with safety. These guys just don't come off the field very often. But Aaron Flowers, 6th on the team in snaps at safety. He's played 172. You have to go all the way down to 16 and 17 with Woodyard and Lopa, who've played about half as many snaps. So this has not been a reshuffling or a rotation like we see at corner, where the snap counts are a little bit more together. This is Dillon Thieneman is 2nd in the team in defensive snaps at 195, and Aaron Flowers is not far behind.
Yeah, I'd like to credit myself, because I had Flowers pegged as that guy next to Thieneman since the spring game, because I think he led the game in tackles, had an interception in that one, and I just thought his pairing would be a really nice one next to Thieneman in terms of the type of player he is at safety. Kingston Lopa was the other guy that I think people mostly thought would be the other guy, because they're more of a strong safety type. Well, the Thieneman's the free safety. Thieneman plays to the field the whole time, and whoever else is out there plays the boundary. But Flowers has been he's that type of a safety that I thought would pair next to Thieneman because he is a guy that comes out really hard against the run, and that's exactly what he's done this year. He like when you watching him on tape, he flies downhill. Sometimes it gets him like out of position, and I don't. Let me actually the missed tackles. Yeah, he's tied for first on PFF for missed tackles just because of I think he like over pursues at times. Like he just kind of his angles could be better because he's coming downhill so fast to play the run. But it's been exactly what you want next to a guy like Thieneman, where Thieneman's moving all over the place, but Flowers is going to be strong against the run every time, and then he's also solid in coverage. And then with Kingston Lopa, he's a guy they've also moved to different positions in a similar way to Thieneman because I think he's 6'5", like 200. So he just has length that creates issues for teams because they're not used to seeing a safety that's 6'5" with arms that can disrupt in a way that you're just not expecting, because like they play him in that rover spot, and I think it's a really strong spot for him because not only does it let him come down and be a guy who can hit in the run game because he is a bigger safety, but when you play him a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, I think if you were to like do like the percentage of snaps in the box, in the slot at free safety, his out of Oregon as safeties is definitely the highest in the box, because when he's closer to the line of scrimmage, his arms are so long they can disrupt passing lanes that other players can't from that close to the line of scrimmage. You need those guys to be further back and rely on their sideline to sideline speed to disrupt those plays, but he can play up at the line of scrimmage and just stick his arms at passing lanes, and it's hard to get around him.
I was just pulling up the splits for both Lopa and Thieneman by position. You're right. More than half. Well, no, that's not quite right. About a little more than a third of Lopa's snaps have been played in the box. 36, 35 at free safety, 18 at slot corner. Didn't play very much against Penn State, but the previous 4 games playing about 20 snaps per game. Pretty significant in terms of kind of the versatility he provides. And then Thieneman, same thing. I mentioned it earlier. 64 snaps in the box, 33 at slot corner, 94 at free safety. I think the thing that stands out to me, and this goes back to the conversation we kind of opened the show with, is how frequently Thieneman was in the box. Mm-hmm. He played 32 snaps in the box against Penn State. He'd only played 32 in the first 4 games combined. He'd been averaging about 22 snaps per game at free safety, only played 16 there. Just notable in terms of kind of how they're moving the deck chairs around the boat, right? Moving players around, finding places that fit.
And that's also matchup based. Penn State's going to come out, and I mean, it's literally exactly what I asked Dillon Thieneman at media going into that Penn State game. I was like, because there's 12, or that you're going to get moved to the box, the slot more, and he was like, well, we're not going to say what we're going to do, and then he did get moved to the
John,
box.
they were still coming up with the game plan, John. They were still devising the game plan when you asked the question. I didn't know. You didn't know.
I'm trying to help, man. I'm trying to help. But yeah, so it's part of that's game plan based. They did more of that stuff against Oregon State too, because Oregon State wanted to try to run the ball. Didn't really happen that much, but it takes a special player to be able to do the amount of versatile things that he does, and that's why he's the top safety in the portal. And that's what Dan does so well in terms of building this roster. Is the roster is built through the recruiting, and the basis of the roster is built through the recruiting and these prospects that he gets and develops, and then it's finding those pieces to plug and play specific positions to kind of elevate that team to the next level. And Thieneman's brought him in, and he can plug and play in this versatile safety spot and do all these different things.
All right, let's wrap up with just the nickel, the star, whatever. What would you prefer? I refer to it as, John. What is it?
Well, they call it the star in the defense, so I've gotten used to calling it the star.
Okay. We'll call it star. There's just a lot of different ways to refer to this position. Going into the year, I wondered if this was Dalen Austin's job. I also thought it was notable that they added Jaden Kennedy kind of seemingly in conjunction with the possibility that Austin may not be available because of the court case situation with the unfortunate situation that happened, now been over a year ago. I think it's notable that not only has Jaden been the guy who's won this job, he's basically doubling up the snaps of Austin. And if you look at the PFF grades amongst starters, he's only behind Mateo Younglele and Jerry Mixon. He's got a grade of 80 flat. So this is a guy who's come in here, I would say a little bit overlooked because he was a later addition. Also, he really impresses because he's very slight of frame, but he's been very effective as a tackler, has one of the better tackling grades on the team, and is not afraid to just like mix it up there. I just think the versatility is super valuable, and it's kind of exactly what they need from that spot.
Yeah, he's been such an underrated part of this defense, and he was such a sneaky good pickup by the Ducks to be able to kind of get. I think he signed in like February. It was late in that cycle, but credit to Chris Hampton here, because Chris Hampton that he was a player who played under Chris Hampton when Chris Hampton was the defensive coordinator at Tulane, so he has a background with Kennedy, knows about what he can do. Kennedy was playing a lot of outside corner at Tulane, was playing in the slot. At Ole Miss, he was playing a lot of safety. And so not only was it an insurance plan for some of that, some of the Austin stuff, but I think that Hampton knew that, hey, this guy I can move him around to different spots, and so they brought him in, and he's played safety when they want to drop Dillon Thieneman into the box. He's been really good in the slot, and like you said, the run defense has really stood out from him, because. And he said he's put on about 10 or so pounds of muscle, and it's stood out on the tape, because I think he was listed at 175 at Ole Miss. He's like 185 now, and but he gets up there. He's not afraid to take on blocks at the line of scrimmage either. It's not just he wants to try to make a tackle. He'll take on blocks to help his teammates make tackles as well. So he plays really physical for a guy that listed at 185. You wouldn't expect him to impact a run like that, but he really does.
He's not a guy who I anticipate is maybe drafted at all, but if he is, it's going to be back end. But he feels like a guy who will find a role. I just think that he does enough things well that it feels like a guy who's going to have an opportunity to make a roster at some point. And I don't know if I felt that way coming in. He's been one of my. I put him in my 10 surprise role guy list I put together earlier today, just because it maybe a little bit similar to Malik Benson, of somebody they brought in, but it felt like kind of an afterthought, because you already felt like, oh, they've already got all these other receivers or all these other.
I had legitimately forgotten he transferred in when he showed up in the spring game and was starting at like the star opposite of Dalen Austin. And I was like, wait, who's this 22 guy? Oh yeah, that's right. They got that transfer from Ole Miss late.
Yeah. And here we are talking 5 games in. He's, I think, undoubtedly a plus addition, a plus player, playing really well. I think that's basic. I guess I'll throw this at you, John. It is a real speculative one, so if you don't have much of an answer, that's fine. When Trey McNutt and Dorian Brew, assuming they do come back, neither have been able to play this year. Neither have also been listed as out for the season, which is a designation we've seen for Bryce Bolton recently and a couple of other players in the past, not this year. Do you anticipate either of those guys is able to crack the defensive back rotation? Because this is a really deep, talented group, but those are, again, 2 guys who are also like top 75, top 100 recruits.
Like you said, it's just the depth that makes this hard rotation to crack. It's not that those guys necessarily aren't talented enough, but when you also lost all that practice time and the experience that you would have had, Trey McNutt got hurt in, I think it was late July or early August even. So that was plenty of practice that he missed. Exactly. It was plenty of practice that not only has he missed through the season through these parts, but all that fall camp practice that he missed. I think it's probably a bit too late to get those guys into this rotation, just because, like, in terms of if you're getting Trey McNutt on the field, I don't know exactly what kind of safety he is, but I think you could use him in the slot. I think you could use him at the free safety, but you've got like at least 2 guys ahead of you at each of those spots. And then when you look at the cornerback room, it's the same thing. I think Dorian Brew, as talented as he is, another top 100, maybe even a top 50 recruit, I think he was at cornerback. Mm-hmm. But you got 2 other guys, just as good as freshmen, but those guys were practicing the entire time and have had all that experience over Dorian Brew at this point.
One thing I should have brought up a moment ago when we were talking about the star position is Dalen Austin did deal with an injury. Dan said he was going to be okay on Wednesday. That might be a thing to monitor and could be a path to somebody else carving out a little bit of a role in the short term if Dalen does miss games. Dan sort of indicated he'd be okay. I don't know if that meant long term or for the Indiana game, but wanted to kind of make sure we included that here. I'll ask you the last question, the same one I asked you last time. Is there anything else on the defense that we haven't talked about? Gone almost an hour again that you really wanted to get off your chest, John?
Not really. I think we hit all the things that we wanted to. This is a very versatile defense, and that's really exciting because you have so many. You have players that can give you versatile, can be versatile, like Kennedy, like Thieneman, who can play in different spots that allows you to get to all these different things. I think it's going to be big down the season because the more confusion you can create for offenses, the better it is. So if you can, especially in a year like this year where so many of the quarterbacks of these top teams, even guys like Julian Sayin, who has been as good as he's been, even Dante, you got so many first-year starters for a lot of these teams. The more versatile and multiple you can be on defense, the better, because it's going to be hard for those guys to pick up on in the playoffs.
All three Big Ten first, second, and third team quarterbacks are gone. They all graduated. So that kind of puts in perspective. I don't know how many other NFL caliber quarterbacks Oregon's frankly going to face after they play Mendoza next week. All right. Fun podcast, John. Good. Another good debut. Got a lot of nice positive comments in the comments last time. Hopefully people are as kind this time. When you do this too long, though, suddenly they start to turn on you. So hopefully you're not quite to that point yet. But thanks for coming on and doing this. I know we'll get you on sometime next week to do a little preview of Indiana, maybe do a little post game there. I'll have Jackson Moore on the show Friday, doing a little bit of recruiting talk to kind of tide over those, I guess, with questions and concerns, maybe. I don't know if they have too many about the 2026 or 2027 recruiting class. But before then, thank you for listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Talk to you later, folks.